major categories of work: nonfiction, and sometimes I throw a little bit of fiction into the nonfiction, and you know it when you see it, as parables and examples to make it a little better. It actually works better that way. But it's primarily nonfiction with a little bit of humor in, and some details and some references, maybe an appendices. I think I'm going to have one in this work. But it's nonfiction. Then there's this huge gap, this massive void in the middle where nothing exists. And on the other side is fiction. Pure, unadulterated, fantastic fiction with a difference. It's fiction for the sake of fiction. It's very imaginative. It's a lot of fun. However, I have always thought that pure fiction on its own was bland and meaningless. Empty. You read the works of Edgar Rice Burroughs. You read the Martian series or the Tarzan series. That's not meaningless. There's all kinds of human conditions, human situations inside of those novels. You never saw them in the movies. You have to read the books. There's all kinds of explanations of the human condition inside those works. That makes it worth reading them. Plus it's adventure, and it's romance, and it's a fun time. You put that into a good combination, and that purely fiction work becomes very important, and you want it, you read it, you keep it, it survives, it lives on. But you've got to be really good at what you are doing to achieve that special blend. It's like that special Colombian blend of coffee that only a few people can make. There are a lot of imitations, but only a few people actually make the genuine best Colombian coffee. The rest of it wasn't worth buying, wasn't worth drinking. Well, fiction has that downfall, it has that pitfall. If you don't have the right combination, what good is it? It has to address the human condition, and it has to give lessons, it has to give hope, it has to have advice, it has to have humor, it has to have adventure, but it has to have pertinence to life on Earth, to the human condition and the human species. The human species has to get something out of it, or it's just bland, worthless crap like the filth that's printed in queer mag rags today, all of which is nothingness. Not even good enough to wipe your ass with. Who wants all that ink on their ass? What I do is I write fiction, purely fiction, with this huge void between what I write as nonfiction, and I work it up really good as a purely adventure and humorous and wonderful good time. That's the skeleton of it, the original format of it, the original structure of it. And I make that really good and make that a lot of fun and interesting. But then I sit back and I look at that draft and I say, it pleased me, I liked it, it was fun to write it, it's going to be a really good novel, but if this is all I did, this odyssey of fiction that I just wrote out, if that's all there was to it, and I never thought about the Odyssey as an example before, if that's all there was to it, it wouldn't be worth sharing with anyone. It would not be worth giving to the human species. On its own, it would not be worth it. No. On its own, it would just please me, but how would I know it would please anyone else? I'm blowing my nose. How would I know anyone else would like it? I mean, it's pretty well tailored to my own imagination. I have a good imagination and people like it, but if all you get is pure imagination from a work of fiction, what did you get? What did you get? Escapism? I suppose that would be of some value if you were in a prison camp. A lot of you could be in prison camps. Desaliens, which is about 100 miles from here, south of here, is a prison camp. It used to be called Des Moines. I renamed it Desaliens. Desaliens. Because it's completely alien to the state around it. And it's killing the state around it. And it's turning the state around it into a shithole, a trash can, a trash yard, a junkyard, for its own insane lunacies and filth and greeds. Greed, 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 greed. So I renamed it Desaliens, and I banished it. If you're a prisoner in that filth, you might need pure escapism. You'll have to look somewhere else for it, though, because I cannot write just pure escapism. I have this instinct, one of many, that tells me that the way to do it is to completely work out a storyline and create a novel and bring it into existence. Follow this closely. I hope a lot of you get the same idea, or you can follow this idea. Get the ideas, get the original thought patterns, the imaginations. You will see incredible visions and dreams. It might actually work itself into your dreams. A lot of my storylines work themselves into my dreams, and I've shared a few of them with you in my writing. Just tidbits and snippets here and there, but they manifest themselves as an entire dream. Get these visions, get these ideas deep inside your brain and your soul, and write it out. Make the outlines, create the timelines. If it's got any basis in historical fact, you'll have to do a lot of research into real history. But don't let that bog you down. Write and write and write, purely from the imagination point of view. Write your imagination and your dream and your visions. Write them out. Finish them. Create the characters. None of this stupid dipshit crap that's going on now with all of these video game empires and video game worlds. Create real characters and real people, real entities. Give them lives. Don't expect anybody to think this is fantastic. Do it because you're creating it. You're creating a world. Ask Ridley Scott. Create a world. Flesh it out with characters. Create the characters, their habits, their personalities. No pun intended. Their character traits. Their histories, personal histories. You have to create the history of the entire work. where it all came from, what it's all doing right now, and where it all thinks it's going to. You're creating a world. Create the world. Create the people, the characters, the entities, if they're non-humans, if they're aliens, real aliens, not that crap 100 miles south of here. If they're real aliens, invent them, create them, give them lives. Give them histories. Give them a civilization. Create the civilization. Work, 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 work. Write, think, imagine. Write, think, imagine. Create it all. And when you're done, all you've got is whatever you created, and it's worth nothing to anyone else, except you. Now, for some reason, you were trying to escape being in prison, and you did this as escapism for yourself. More power to you. Good for you. I hope it worked, but maybe that's as far as it goes. Not going any further. Unless you're some psychotic that wants to put it into a video game for other people who only want escapism because they're also in prison too. Otherwise, you've spent all of this time, you've done all of this writing, and what have you got? You've got a world, you've got an existence, you've got characters, you've got happenings, you've got events, you've got current histories. For what? What are you going to do with it? What I'm getting at is you have created something that is alive in your mind that you can now use. If you have that extra ability, you can now use it to benefit everyone else with. But so far it's not there. So far it does not have that ability except for pure escapism. So far it's simply a living model to do something with. You've created something that you can do something with. Hopefully not for pure profit and personal gain. You've got something now that you can do something with for everybody, above and beyond escapism. Escapism is so transient and temporary. Temporary escapism has to be renewed every day. But if you take what you've created and you now put it in what I call the service of nonfiction, and all of the characters in your work, and all of the things that happen in your work, all of the world that you have created suddenly has a purpose to teach things about nonfiction to the audience. Suddenly the world you just created and could have been worthless becomes extremely important. Because now it's a vehicle carrying with it all kinds of messages and advice and examples and parallels, parables, juxtapositions, contrasts. Look at this. This is happening today. It happened 100 years ago too. Why were you not told what happened 100 years ago? What you are struggling with today, in your time, also happened 100 years ago. Why were you not told? Because the same kinds of assholes that caused the same problems 100 years ago are causing the same problems today to you, and they don't want you to know what their kind caused 100 years ago. Of course they don't want you to know. They're the same kinds of assholes that were killing everything 100 years ago. That's why you go to public school. To not know anything. Some of you will love the video if you ever see this. Have a shot of tea. So you've got this work of fiction, and you've built this world, and you've created this characters, and this character set, actually, maybe 100 characters, which is a little heavy. That's a little on the heavy side, 100 characters. But you've spent a lot of time building up this world, and follow my advice. Build it completely from your imagination for no purpose whatsoever yet. Listen to me and trust me. Trust me in this. Build your world, your imagination, your characters, their traits, their histories, their interrelationships with each other. Build it all strictly from your imagination, your visions, your dreams, without thinking of one other purpose for it. And complete that. That's your draft model. That's your draft world. But make it complete. I've got quite a few that I've already created that are sitting there waiting for work. Sitting there waiting for me to decide how I'm going to apply them to nonfiction. Let's say I'm talking about work model ABC. Work model ABC. I don't want to give you a real name. Oh, you know about the Gronk Bloodline Chronicles. You know about that one. You know about the Legend of Malcolm Jackson. You know about that one. But you don't know about the other ones. You know about Navarian, the Admiral, and that's a big one. That's equivalent to a Tarzan series or a Martian series. But you don't know how I'm going to use it yet. But take one of these as an example. ABC. The world and the people and the characters of ABC. And you simply make it, create it, pour into it your best imagination. Every ability, every strength, every asset you could pour into it. Write it all down. Register it. Log it. Create tables. Create appendices. Accumulate this massive amount of information about this world that you're creating. Make it come alive in your mind. And do it only for its own sake. You have to do it that way because when you put it to work, I'm starting to lose my voice, when you start to put it to work, you will tax that world to its limitations. You are going to stress that world. You're going to push it, pound on it, stretch it, torture it, unlike anything you thought it could ever take or it was ever designed to take. First, you create it for what it is. Then, you look back at it and you say to yourself, okay, how do I want to use it? A lot of writers don't get to this point. A lot of writers just never reach this. They have this dull, end of the tunnel idea that when they finally finished creating the world, and maybe a storyline, 1 or 2 storylines through the world, which help. It's good to have pre-existing storylines going on. That really fleshes it out and gives it a lot of threads through the world, which are very important. But they have this dull end of the tunnel vision of finality. They think when they have finally finished one story through this world, well, that's it, and it's done, and it's complete, and yahoo, everybody's going to love this. Only the people who need pure escapism will get anything out of it. Because you haven't put it to work yet. Now comes the second part. All you've done so far is the first part. The second part is put it to work in real time for the real world, for the real human species, with the real problems. You don't necessarily have to talk about current, putrid, psychotic politicians like the scum in Wash This Death City. Who would write about that scum? And you don't have to address in particular any particular vermin in Wash This Death City by name or by identity or by description. You don't have to zone in on individual disease, individual bugs, individual vermin. Instead, you can address larger scale problems like politics in general, queer government in general, deviance in general, evil education, pseudo-education in general. You can choose larger topics and pare them down into smaller topics and chop them to pieces. Just tear them apart and reveal how terrible it is. And give answers. Give solutions. Give results. Make the entire work at the end of part 2 what I call fiction in the service of nonfiction. And now it has a great importance. You've taken what was pure fantasy and only important to you and people who needed escapism, and you've made something great out of it. Something worth keeping. Keeping. For 2 reasons. The terrible things you're writing about may keep recurring unless they are exterminated, which I highly recommend. And if they're finally eliminated, which I highly recommend, your work still has pertinence because it teaches what happened back then and what was so terrible back then. And you don't ever want this in the future. You do not ever want this in your lives in the future. So if you want to know what's possible and how bad it could have been, read this. Even though that has been eliminated, here's the warning. And the warning is your work. At the end of part 2, where you took this world that you created and all of its characters and its storylines, and you metamorphosized it. You applied it to nonfiction and the general, really difficult problems that we go through every day and every week and every month and every year. That's what I write for fiction. There's this huge vacuum, this huge void between, and nonfiction on one side, which you're familiar with, and fiction on the other side. But not escapism fiction. It's fiction, but it arcs over to nonfiction. It arcs over in application and pertinence to the nonfiction side. It draws directly from the nonfiction side, which arcs over to the fiction side. So there's these two arcs going on in both directions. They are interrelated in that way. But I maintain a vacuum in between, a void in between. That's very important because you don't want to mix them up too much. I hope you understood that. I think that's enough for one evening. That's enough for one evening. All right, I'll shut up. Have a good day. Have a good evening. Hey, there's a lot more happening. And I'll be talking to you again.